As I turned onto I-70, the old Dodge sedan groaned a little, the engine moving in a rhythm I had grown to trust over time. All of it sounded like memories. The hum of tires on wet pavement, the faint rattle of the glove box. A jacket folded neatly for the Marine Corps, and a worn photograph were on the passenger seat. Denise, my wife, was holding our infant son, Tyran, in the picture, which had its corners wrinkled from years of being held close. 13 years ago, Denise passed away. She passed away from cancer before Tyran finished 6th grade, and ever since, we've had to figure out how to keep standing together. I wasn't just driving to a graduation that morning. I was driving to see my son cross a stage in cap and gown as evidence that something good had survived. The boy we raised alone. Marines are believed to be made of iron. The truth is that most of our promises come true. And this trip, 8 hours through Ohio, Indiana, and into Texas, was one I promised myself I wouldn't miss, no matter what. I turned off the radio because it was making static sounds. Silence was simpler. Since the war, Denise's passing, and the world's decision that quiet men are easy to overlook, silence has been my companion. I remember whispering as the Ohio border faded into the distance in my rearview mirror. "D, stay with me. Let me persevere with him." The remainder of the drive consisted of short breaks and long highways. I once made a stop in St. Louis to stretch, and then near Dallas to press the uniform's creases out. I did not wear it out of pride. Rather, I did so out of respect. I learned from my father that you should dress how you feel when you enter a significant space. My style was formal, sacred. The sun had turned the horizon gold and orange by the time I got to the small Texas town where Tyran's high school was. Already, there were a lot of families in the gymnasium. The parking lot was lined with minivans and pickup trucks like parade floats. Everyone seemed proud, exuberant, and happy. After removing the dust from my sleeve and getting out of the car, I pinned the Silver Eagle globe and anchor to my chest. I took a deep breath and stood still for a moment. I wanted Tyran to remember me as a disciplined, steady, and tall individual. Inside, conversation filled the air. Without looking up, a woman at the door took my ticket. Family Section B, Row 3 was printed. I found my seat, third from the aisle, by following the signs. That evening, Tyran was lining up with his classmates at the far end of the gym when I first saw him. Although he hadn't yet seen me, I could tell he was looking through the crowd. I laughed at that. That was how he had always been, always looking for me in a crowd to make sure I was there. The shift came next. With their heads lowered and scanning the rows, 2 security guards began to walk down the aisle, until one of them stopped at my shoulder twice and tapped it. I didn't think much of it. "Sir, this spot is reserved." He received my ticket for me. Family Section B, Row 3. That is what it states. He grinned. "Are you positive that this is yours?" I gave him a death stare. "I traveled from Ohio for 8 hours to sit in this seat. You think I traveled this far because of a mistake?" His tone was firm as the second guard leaned closer. "We've had problems in the past. You will need to move to the back for us." That's when I felt something shift within me rather than in the room. A squeezing. A silence that began at my spine's base and moved upward. I had experienced it before in combat, during grief, and in quiet times when the world tested who you really were. I remained silent. Beginning mumbles spread across the gym. The guards raised hands, the confusion, and their uniforms caught people's attention. Several phones were pulled out. "He's a Marine," someone said in a low voice. Then, as if drawn by instinct, 6 men rose from various gym areas. They were unknown to me at the time. However, I was aware of the posture. Square shoulders, steady step. Eyes are calm. SEALs in the Navy, they didn't say a word as they got closer. Mere presence. The kind that moved slowly through the room. They moved in between me and the guards, with one of them, a tall man with gray hair on his temples. His tone was steady and almost still. "You don't touch that man," you say. No dangers. No yelling. Simply speaking the truth with the kind of weight that only discipline can provide. The officers froze. The crowd seemed to stop breathing, which was palpable. They then retreated as though order had been restored. I silently thanked each soldier by making a single nod to the seal. He returned it silently as well. The celebration continued. The band resumed playing as if nothing had happened after the principal cleared his throat and called the following name. However, everything had. The cheers that erupted in that gym when Tyran's name was called, Marine Drayson, were not reserved for graduates. Dignity was required for every quiet moment. He also smiled through tears when he turned to see me. I felt peace for the first time in years that day. Compared to the trip to Texas, the journey home felt longer. After the confetti, hugs, and fond farewells of graduation, everyone returns to their own lives. Tyran promised to call me the next morning as he ate dinner with his classmates. I didn't care. He was in charge of that night. With a paper cup of coffee cooling in the console, I got back on the highway and headed north through the darkness of Texas. The road was quiet and endless. My phone buzzed for the first time near Little Rock. But then again, the notifications were constant by the time I reached Missouri. Outside of St. Louis, at a gas station, I finally checked. Lewis. A message from Lewis, an old Marine friend. Brother, you can be found everywhere online. Remain calm. Contact me. My heart dropped. The clip was revealed when I went down the page. The 6 SEALs getting up from their seats and the guards grabbing my arm had been caught on camera by someone at the graduation. The subtitle read, "They attempted to relocate a Marine father from the graduation of his son. Keep an eye on what comes next." There were already 1.7 million views on it. With my phone and cup in one hand and the gas station's buzzing lights in the other, I remember feeling the air change around me. I had witnessed battlefields that were quieter than that parking lot. 2 days later, when I got home to Dayton, Ohio, the story had exploded. Outside the apartment building, news trucks set up camp. Reporters asked for the Marine from the video by knocking on doors. Even the Grants, my neighbors, brought casseroles over like it was a funeral. I didn't want it at all. I had only sat where my son had asked me to. I turned off the phone and closed the blinds. Even so, the video kept playing in my head. The same mix of pride and ache came back with each replay. Pride for how I stood my ground, and ache that it had to happen in the first place. A note was slipped under my door by a Columbus Dispatch reporter on the 4th day. "Mr. Drayson, before others rewrite it, please share your side." I did not respond. I wasn't ready to make noise out of a quiet strength moment. Nonetheless, the noise located me. A Cleveland-based veteran group called to offer legal assistance. Activists for civil rights desired statements. A Columbus-based television producer offered to help tell my story. Each one sounded like opportunity disguised as compassion and promised respect. The reality? I didn't get mad. I was worn out. His voice was at once proud and worried when I finally called Tyran. "They're calling you a hero, Dad." I responded, "No, son. Heroes receive medals." I simply stayed in my seat. He laughed softly, unsurely. Papers and college forms were rustling. I could hear. He had already made up his mind to enroll at Ohio State University. I laughed at that. After all, maybe the mess would be used for something positive. The knock came a week later. Investigators from the Ohio Attorney General's Civil Rights Division. 2 men in plain suits. They were measured and polite. Alvarez, a younger man, one of them, said, "Mr. Drayson, we're looking into whether the security guards acted improperly. Could you please respond to a few questions?" I concurred. The tape recorder was quietly whirring as they sat at my kitchen table. They inquired whether anyone else had intervened, what the guards had said, and about the ticket. I relayed everything to them in its entirety. Alvarez paused his recorder after I finished. "Sir, you handled yourself with remarkable restraint," he whispered. "Some people wouldn't have." Restraint. It is taught to Marines, but the everyday wars of perception in America are different. Alvarez promised to keep me informed and gave me his card before he left. He appeared sincere. Updates entitled "State Investigates Discrimination at Texas School Against Ohio Marine" were broadcast by Columbus stations within days. Legislators provided input. Preachers gave sermons in churches. People saw in the story anything they wanted, including race, patriotism, authority, and humility. The story became a mirror. I remained silent throughout everything. Then, out of nowhere, a handwritten letter with the Toledo, Ohio, postmark arrived. Mr. Drayson. In that gym, I was one of the parents. My husband also participated. Our son learned more about courage from watching you remain composed than from any textbook. I just wanted to express my gratitude. Emily G., Toledo, Ohio. No headline could match what that one note did. It made me realize that sincere silence speaks loudest. I eventually agreed to one interview with a Columbus-based veterans radio show. There are no lights or cameras. All that was left was a microphone and the low hum of old equipment. I was asked by the host why I remained seated. I said, because it was the birthday of my son. Because moving would have informed him that it is acceptable to sacrifice dignity for comfort. In my life, I've done enough of that. I walked along the Scioto River after the show, watching the water's reflection of skyscrapers ripple. That evening, Columbus was tranquil, and the air was cool and forgiving. That's when a young man in his mid-20s, with a sharp haircut and a newspaper folded in his hand, came up to me. He stated, "Sir, my father served as well. This week, he watched your video every night. He claimed you brought back memories of who he used to be." Uncertain of what to say, I nodded. Sometimes, people just need to be in the silence and not speak. By autumn, there were two camps in the online debate: those who saw dignity and those who saw defiance. Strangers arguing about my motives filled comment threads. Tyran read the majority of it, while I didn't. He called one night, his voice shaking. "They're saying horrible things, Dad. You ought to protect yourself." I told him, "No, son. You don't wrestle with pigs in the mud. You get dirty, and they like it." He exhaled. "However, they don't know you. They are not required to. You do." The line then, "I love you, Dad," remained silent. That was sufficient. That year, winter arrived in Ohio early. The city's noise was muffled by the snow sticking to the streets. Through my window one evening, headlights flickered. The seals were represented by 6 silhouettes when I opened the door. Creed Marston came forward, his voice remaining as composed as it had been that previous evening. "We had a training event while we were in town. We figured we'd check on you." I welcomed them inside. With all of that quiet strength contained within, the living room seemed suddenly small. We spoke little about loss, service, and the fact that none of us had anticipated our silence to resonate so strongly. Something that Creed said before he left stuck with me. "Solomon, you didn't start a fight. You finished one correctly." I looked at the uniform that was hanging by the door after they left. The pride had not faded, though the fabric had. Columbus's phone call, the Ohio Civil Rights Commission, contacted me a month later to request my participation in their formal review. Tyran insisted, and I hesitated. "Dad, if you don't speak, someone else will tell it the wrong way." I told you. He was correct. So I took the same route, used the same car, and drove once more to Columbus. I recognized Alvarez from that day at my kitchen table as I entered the hearing room. I ignored the cameras that lined the back wall. When they asked me to explain what had occurred, I simply replied. I didn't say anything. I remained in my seat. I thought that the ticket I was holding was worth the same as anyone else's. That is all. After that, there was a stillness that you could feel in your bones. Snow began to fall once more outside the courthouse. I kept walking while the reporters yelled questions at me. On the white pavement that led to my car, my boots left clean marks. I felt peace again for the first time in months, not because the world had changed, but because I had stayed the same. I whispered to the night that winter evening as I crossed the bridge over the Scioto, city lights reflecting on the ice. "Do not move, Solomon. Hold your ground. The silence of yours has already spoken." I've always believed that retribution comes with sound, like sirens, shouted verdicts, and strikes with the gavel. However, when it finally got to me, it was quiet, like falling snow. The world had moved on months after the Columbus hearing. New rage and heroes were discovered on the internet. The video, which had once been seen by millions of people, is now digital dust in a feed that has been forgotten. My life had, however, not quite resumed in Dayton. People still recognized me as the Marine who stood his ground with grace wherever I went. I was thanked by some. Others asked questions in a whisper, curious about what it was like to be treated disrespectfully in public and to become a symbol without asking for it. I had no idea how to respond to that, because everyone else, except the man who wears it, finds it easy to be a symbol. A letter arrived from Austin, Texas, the school district where Tyran had graduated, at the beginning of March. The district seal was present on the envelope. A typed apology from the superintendent herself was contained within. Mr. Drayson, we acknowledge that the treatment you received was biased and inappropriate following an internal review and cooperation with Ohio authorities. We sincerely regret the incident and the harm to you and your loved ones. We have established new procedures to prevent it from occurring again. Sincerely, Dr. Martha Lang. I read it probably 5 times. Even though the words were formal and sterile, they still had weight. It had nothing to do with publicity or compensation. It dealt with the truth. Mailed, signed, and written, I put the letter on the mantel next to Tyran's graduation picture that night. I slept deeply for the first time since that day, not because justice had been done, but because recognition had arrived. Tyran had settled into life at Ohio State University by the spring. I was invited to Columbus for Parents' Weekend by him. Students laughing and carrying books, unaware of the small miracles that keep a life together, filled the campus with energy. I met Tyran's friends and professors through him. He was doing well. He was strong, kind, and steady. He had more than just my eyes, I realized when I saw him smile. He had inherited my moderation. He asked me that evening if I wanted to walk the oval, the campus's central green space. He turned to me and said, as we walked beneath the trees that were growing, Dad, I still remember that Texas day. I admitted, so do I. Do you know what I discovered? He stated, that force is not always loud. Sometimes it just won't move at all. I halted my walking. My throat got tighter. He understood. I thought he wasn't listening all those years because he was learning. I received a call from Colonel Harper, a former commanding officer who is now in charge of a veteran outreach center in Cincinnati. 2 weeks later, he said, Solomon, I've been following your story. I believe you could assist us. We are launching a mentorship program for young veterans adjusting to civilian life. We could use a man who is able to maintain dignity in battle. I was hesitant. The mission was not over yet, but the days in uniform were. Thus, I concurred. I met dozens of men and women who had fought in wars overseas only to lose themselves back home at the Ohio Veterans Resource Center. Therapy did not help them. They required comprehension. I told them my story, the quiet version rather than the viral one, the one that talks about restraint, fear, and the price of being seen. One of the young Marines looked up when I was done and said, Sir, you inspire me to believe that silence can be more effective than shouting. That was the first time I realized that peace could spread beyond just me. A final notice from the Ohio Civil Rights Commission arrived to me a month later. The guards were found to have acted discriminatorily. The district implemented new diversity and behavioral training protocols after they lost their licenses. The information barely made the news. However, it did not have to. I didn't need any support, only written truth. Dayton felt fresh once more by the summer. I had begun volunteering at a local youth boxing gym, teaching discipline, respect, and breathing techniques that I had previously utilized to withstand both deployment and public humiliation. One boy remained one evening while the kids packed their gloves. He was probably 14 years old and shy, and his skin was bruised from life, not boxing. Coach Solomon, why don't you ever yell? He asked. I grinned. Because power does not depend on how loud you get. It's how long you can keep your cool when other people lose it. He gave a slow nod. I saw the development of comprehension. I realized then that this was the purpose of everything, not the headlines or the explanations. In a gym on Ohio's west side, the lesson was taught quietly, one child at a time. Even when the roads are empty and the air hums low across the plains, I still occasionally drive late. From Columbus, I travel west on Highway 70, past the river and the lights, and into the pitch-black expanse of open Ohio sky. That drive brings me peace, the kind that doesn't need to be forgiven or celebrated. I recall Tyran, who is now a law student, saying once, "Dad, it's possible that what occurred to you wasn't just about you. Maybe someone needed to see what dignity looks like." He might be right. I no longer drive to forget. I drive to remember who I used to be and what I've become, as well as how silence has taken me further than rage ever could. I still get questions about what I would have done differently, such as speaking up, confronting the guards, or making a scene. I declare the truth to them. No, because the goal was not to fight and win. It was to preserve the sacredness of my son's time. Justice brings about some judgments. Peace was brought my way. It's okay if I never become famous again. There is no need for another headline in the world. It requires men willing to sit in it and a little more stillness. That is my reality. Ohio is that. Solomon Drayson, that's me. The problem with peace is that it doesn't come with much fanfare. It arrives slowly, similar to the color shift from gray to gold as the sun rises over an Ohio field. Until the long night has passed, you barely notice it happening. 3 years had passed since the incident in Texas. The world had moved on, and the headlines had vanished. But something had forever changed inside of me. I had always been a man who was strict. We Marines don't talk about feelings, much because we put them away like classified documents. However, that day at Tyran's graduation opened a door for me. I carried my anger for months like a shiny metal that was heavy underneath. The seasons in Ohio helped me heal. The silence of winter, the forgiveness of spring, the warmth of summer, and the perspective of fall taught me the rhythm of letting go. I drove down to Columbus-Scioto River one late autumn morning, the same location I had walked to after my first interview. The trees had taken on a rusty red hue, and the water was moving steadily like time had passed. As I held that now-worn Texas apology letter, I observed it flutter in my hand. After that, I neatly folded it and dumped it into the river. It was caught and carried forward by the current. That was my way out, not retaliation or publicity. Release only. When Tyran graduated from Ohio State Law School, he asked me to stand in the front row. Identical request as before. His voice carries the same nervous pride. He stated, "Dad, I want you there. You're not moving this time." Faces that were hopeful, proud, and unaffected by the weight of public opinion filled the auditorium. My heart raced as I sat down, this time out of gratitude rather than fear. He looked directly at me from above the crowd when Tyran's name was called. He did not wave or smile. All he did was nod once, the same mute acknowledgement that I had previously made to the SEALs in Texas. The ring had been completed. He said something after the ceremony that made my chest tighten. "Dad, you taught me law without using books," I said. "I learned from you how to defend what is right without losing who you are." In that instant, I realized that redemption does not involve rewriting your story. It all comes down to comprehending the context in which it was originally written. The Ohio Civil Rights Commission asked me to speak at a state conference in Cleveland a few months later. The topic was honor in agony. I was hesitant. I had never imagined myself to be a speaker. But maybe it was time, finally. I didn't read from a script when I stood at the podium in front of rows of lawmakers, veterans, students, and everyday citizens. I just recalled what I said. I used to think that boot camps and wars helped build courage. But it isn't. It was built around times when you could lose your cool and choose to keep your dignity. When the world challenges you to act, but you choose to remain still. The room remained silent. A young woman then got to her feet and wept. My brother was expelled from school because he stood up for himself. Hearing you reinforces my belief that he was right to remain composed. More valuable than any medal was that. After that, an older man, a former officer, gave me a handshake and said, "Drayson, you've made a humiliating incident into a lesson for this state." Perhaps so. But it wasn't just me. I had been carried through by Ohio's people, quiet strength, and endlessly tolerant skies. The pace of life had slowed down at home. I continued to serve as a mentor at the Cincinnati Veterans Center, volunteer at the youth gym, and spend the weekends repairing my previous truck. The only things that mattered in the world were service, family, and silence. Tyran and I would sometimes sit on the porch in Dayton on warm evenings to watch the sunset disappear over the horizon. The sweet Ohio blend of struggle and hope filled the air with asphalt and rain. He asked one night, "Dad, are there times when you wish it hadn't happened?" Before responding, I gave it some serious consideration. No, we wouldn't be sitting here in this state if it hadn't. Some storms arrive to wreak havoc. Others have arrived to clear the air. We settled back down to listen to the crickets hum after he gave us a nod. That kind of peace can't be bought. You have to earn it, truth by truth, inch by inch. A young Marine stationed in Camp Lejeune sent me a message years later, long after I had forgotten the story. "Sir, during training, we watched your story. They used it as an illustration of moral fortitude under stress. You brought to my mind the true meaning of Semper Fi." I felt that message more strongly than any headline could. I then realized that my silence had turned into a sermon, lived, not shouted or coerced. The thing about dignity is that it does not require attention. It simply stands tall until the entire world is forced to see it. I drive my old Chevy occasionally down Route 35, a road that runs parallel to the horizon. The fields pass by in waves of green and gold as the radio plays soft music, sometimes gospel and sometimes jazz. I consider all of the different versions of myself I've been as the miles pass by. The Marine who carried out instructions, the man who has lost more than he can describe. The father who remained stationary in his seat. The man who found quiet peace. I always pass a small sign with the following message somewhere between Dayton and Columbus: keep the course. Despite being written for truckers, it feels like it was written just for me. Remember this if you've ever been silenced, disrespected, or humiliated in public. The noise in your environment has no bearing on your worth. When everything else shakes, it is measured by how steady you stay. You will be tempted to fight fire with fire by the world. Don't. Fight it with stillness, truth, and the quiet assurance that you are sufficient. That's what I learned in Ohio. That's what my son told me to remember. I'll carry that with me until my last breath. Solomon Drayson is a father, Marine, and Ohioan. Also, this is my redemption. In a world where quiet dignity often goes unnoticed, one man's calm defiance became a lesson in courage for an entire nation. Solomon Drayson, a proud black Marine and widowed father from Ohio, had seen enough of life's battles to know that not all wars are fought overseas. Some happen in the silence of everyday injustice, in the way a man is looked at, spoken to, or told he doesn't belong. So when his son Tyran prepared to graduate high school in Texas, Solomon drove 8 long hours alone, his uniform pressed, his heart full, and his late wife's memory beside him on the passenger seat. But what should have been a day of celebration turned into a moment that tested everything he stood for. As Solomon took his seat in the family section, 2 security guards approached him, insisting he move, despite the valid ticket in his hand. Their tone wasn't about policy. It was about prejudice. The room grew tense. Cameras started to rise. But Solomon stayed calm, his voice steady. He refused to let anger define him. Then, without a word, 6 men stood from the crowd, all wearing subtle signs of military service. Former Navy SEALs. They walked toward Solomon and surrounded him, not as aggressors, but as protectors. Their presence alone shifted the air in the room. No shouting, no violence, just the power of respect. The guards backed off. The crowd fell silent, and the ceremony continued. When Tyran's name was called, Solomon rose, tall, proud, and unshaken. As his son crossed the stage, their eyes met. No words were needed. In that moment, a father's quiet strength became his greatest legacy. Afterward, as the sun set over the Texas parking lot, Solomon and Tyran stood together, A Marine and a graduate, a father and a son, bound by love and dignity. They talked about strength, how it's not in fists or fury, but in knowing who you are when the world doubts you. Solomon reminded his son that courage isn't about making noise. It's about standing firm when silence speaks louder. From Ohio to Texas, from soldier to father, Solomon's journey is more than a story. It's a reflection of every person who has ever been told they don't belong, and every heart that has chosen grace over anger. This is not just about one man. It's about all of us, about the strength we carry quietly, and the battles we win, not by fighting, but by standing tall. For more stories like this, please subscribe to Famographic Show.